technical architect, sorry, also from the Philly MTC.
So also, besides Rich and I, we're joined with our colleagues from our London MTC, Al Erdley and Ali Turnbull. Al, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yep. So my name's Al Erdley. So I work in the London MTC as a technical architect, specialising in modern work and security.
Hi everyone, I am Ali Turnbull. I'm a technical architect in the London MTC and I specialise in security, compliance and identity.
Excellent, thanks guys. So we use the term MTC a few times here. We're coming to you from the Microsoft Technology Centers, and we have 43 locations all around the world in 28 different countries. And what we get to do in our role with Microsoft is work with customers in solving their business problems. We apply the Microsoft platform in general, all different services, all different layers of Microsoft technology, sometimes including our partner solutions that might be industry specific or specific to a particular business problem. And we work with our customers around solving those business problems and helping them move forward with technology. So we get to work with customers directly on a regular basis, which makes this a really cool role. As a business applications architect, a lot of what I do with customers is work with them on how they can drive value through low code capabilities that are available to them in Power Platform. And we've been talking about Power Platform for a number of years, and people are building lots of different applications and processes, and that's all great stuff. But inevitably, what happens is business users will start to build an application. They'll say, "Oh, I'm 80% of the way there, but I still need to do X, Y, Z. I need to go access data that's someplace else in the organization. And so how do I do that?" And really, when we start to drive value out of the low code platform, that sometimes comes from utilizing our pro developer skills in the organization to make more services and capabilities available to our low code developers that are working out of the Power Platform. So a lot of what we're going to start out talking about today is around that scenario. And then as we go on, I'm going to hand over to Al and Ali to talk a little bit more about how we can provide permissions through entitlements for some of these kinds of resources that we're providing from our pro devs. So from a pro developer and a Power Platform standpoint, a lot of what we're talking about here is this concept of fusion development. It's creating these fusion teams where we're bringing together our subject matter experts that can utilize low-code tools to build the applications and processes that they need to execute business process on a daily basis, and be able to marry that up with our pro developers who can create services and access to other resources around the organization. So a scenario that we run into, let's say, for example, I'm a business analyst and I'm working with an event planning team in my organization, and we're looking to plan a conference, kind of like Ignite. And we're going to have lots of different sessions with speakers, and we need to schedule those sessions and manage all of that information. So I want to build a Power App that helps me manage all of that information. But one of the problems that I run into is, hey, our event information, all the data about our events and our speakers and everything, that's all captured already in a backend system that I don't have access to from Power Platform. So I'm going to go to my buddy Rich, because he's the developer. I'm going to say, "Hey, Rich, can you help me get access to all this event data so that I can build an application on top of this?"
Absolutely. Yeah, so we can do that. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Bring this up. Our screen here is showing an API that we previously built that goes over top of our conference data, which is the data that Jamie and his team is looking to get access to. This API has been around forever. We have all kinds of different developers who've built applications against it. And this API, or application programming interface, essentially is a contract between the group that owns the data, this conference data, and any pro developers who want to access it. So they know I have to provide certain types of parameters, and there are certain types of actions available to me, And if I call them in the right way, I'm going to get data back. That's kind of the contract that an API represents. And while we have this API out in available for teams to use, we didn't want to just have it by itself. We wanted to put a little bit of protection over top of it. So we brought it into a service in Azure called, get rid of Jamie's picture there, sorry. I brought it into a service in Azure called API Management. And what that does is it provides a couple of things for us. It provides a facade layer over top of our collection of APIs that we might have that we're building, that our developers are building applications against. It gives them a common URL, in this case, this URL that we have down here. So it's a common URL that they can talk to, and all of our APIs are essentially surfaced up through that endpoint. It also provides the ability to include authentication if we wanted to have our apps be registered against Azure AD, and it also provides some capabilities around limiting the number of requests that come through, and a whole host of other things that API management can do, but those are some of the more important ones. So this application, or this API that we've surfaced through API management, we're going to, so now that we have this in API management, we're actually going to create something in Power Apps called the custom connector. And what a custom connector does is it makes it easier for the business developers or the business citizen developers to be able to consume this data that would come back out of our API. So I'm going to go ahead and say create a new connector, and you see that it provides me with an option to choose from a service that already exists in Azure, and that's what we're going to choose here. I'll give it a quick name. I choose my subscription that we're pulling this from. I choose the service, and while our service here is inside of API management, it could be living in a function, it could be living in a logic app. So I have those options there as well. I'm going to say API management, and then I'm going to pick the specific service that we were just looking at inside of Azure, and then the specific API that we're bringing forward. So with the little bit of data that we provided, behind the scenes, the custom connector gets completed with all of the information that's coming out of our API management environment. So we have that common URL that we reference. We have some security in there because our API is locked down with a key. So we have that coming over as our authentication mechanism, but we could, if we wanted to, switch this out and use an app registration and Azure AD. And then finally, there's the definition of the API itself with all the various actions. So now that I've got our API completed here, I can turn this over to Jamie and his team, and they can go ahead and build their application.
Excellent. Thank you, Rich. So as we utilize that, that custom connector, I want to give you a view of what the custom connector looks like on the Power Platform side, because when we start, a lot of times when we start to talk about the term custom connector, people get scared because it sounds really complex, right? Well, the complexity is really in the pro dev work, the custom code that represents those web service APIs that we're just surfacing in the connector. The custom connector in Power Platform is just like any other connector. It's a front end for APIs, because as a citizen developer, I don't even know how to spell API, right? So when I want to use a connector, I can use the actions that are available to me. The connector becomes a front end. And that's what this custom connector is too. It's a front end for our custom APIs. So your end users typically wouldn't have this access that I'm showing on my screen. But if I go into that custom connector and I just test the operation for get sessions, I can actually see the data structure that's coming back from the API that Rich set up for me. So I can see that whole JSON structure and the data that's available to me. And I have my items object. So that's basically an array or a list of the sessions that are coming back. But one of the things I see in the data here is I have an href attribute. That's basically just the link that gets me to the details for that particular session. But then I also have this other object called data that has the title and the time slot and the speaker. It's like those attributes are actually stored in a data dictionary, key value pairs. Now, I bring that up because this is going to be an issue for us when we try to develop our application. So I want you to keep that in mind. So I can look at that data structure. When I want to go use this, this custom connector, I can come into Power Automate. So I created a new Power Automate flow, and I'll click on New Step. And instead of using the built-in connectors, I can go directly to my custom connectors, and I can select that custom connector that Rich just created for me, the Conference API connector. And now I have all of these actions that we saw Rich set up in the APIM service. So here's our get sessions. And again, this is just a front end for that same action. So I can call the get sessions action and get my data back. If I take another flow where I've already tested this out, here's my get sessions action, and I'm actually looking at the output from the API. If I look at our raw output, whoop, that didn't like that. All right. If I look at our raw output, I can still see that, that same data structure where we have the title and the time slot all wrapped up into this data dictionary. Now, when I want to use the custom connector in an application, I can come over to Power Apps and start up a new Canvas app. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is come into our data area and say, well, I want to add the custom connector to my application. That's going to be my data source. So our custom connectors show up as a data source. Under connectors, I'll see our custom connectors in here as well. Now, having access to the custom connectors, you can still include these in your data policies that are part of your governance process, and all of this fits into everything that you're doing from a Power Platform governance perspective. You can control access to these custom connectors as well. So I can add the custom connector to my application. And now what I did here was just create a simple screen with a gallery that allows me to view the list of sessions that are coming back from that API. So in my gallery, when I want to set the items property in my gallery, I can just use Demo Conference API. I can reference that connector directly, and all of the actions that are part of that connector, the actions that we've surfaced through that connector, they're all available to me here, right? So I can go select any of the actions that I want, and I'm basically doing that like a function call, right? So some people are going to say, oh, my business users are never going to do this. This is a little bit complicated, but I will say this, your power users, folks that create pivot tables in Excel, they can do this with very little training, very little explanation, because we're using formulas in PowerFX that are just like Excel, and we're using dot notation to traverse that data structure. Your power users get this. They can do this. So once I get my list of records that I can show in the gallery, now I'm going to come in and I need to surface the title of the session, the time slot, the speaker. I want to get to those attributes that make up these sessions and define what my gallery is going to look like. The problem, though, is that data structure, right? That data object that we were talking about. I have to go index into that using the lookup function. I have to index into our data dictionary based on title or speaker. I have to index into that data dictionary to get the piece of data that I want. Now we've gone beyond what our business users are going to do, right? The data structure is too complex. I can't use that. So now I'm going to say, hey, Rich, can you change the data structure so that I can use it, make it a little bit more accessible when I'm building my application?
Well, hang on there, Jamie. We can't change the API structure, right? Because we talked about at the beginning that the API is a contract between the guys who own the data and all those developers who wrote their own applications that took dependencies against it. So we can't really change the data. But what we have here inside of Power Platform, and I will share my screen again. Let's see. We have in here a section that's part of the custom connector called code. And this is an area where we can actually write some C# code, or a C# class in this case, that can take the response that we're sending out of our API here. So this key value pairing that Jamie mentioned, and change that response up in a way that is more consumable by Jamie and any other applications that are using this custom connector. So this class here, there's some documentation around how we would go ahead and build that. This class inherits from another class called script base, and there's some inheritance or some interfaces going on inside of here. To kind of simplify all that, we actually created a project that you can go out and download. It's open sourced and shared out on GitHub that includes, is basically a .NET Core C# console application that lets you build out your own script class and then upload that file into the custom connector. So I'm going to go over and share that real quick. This particular project that we're looking at here, this is our script class, and there's nothing really in here except a shell of a method for execute async. And for the custom connector, this is what it looks to do all of the processing that you might want to do against that HTTP response. You see, I've also included our base classes, like the documentation tells us we should. So all of this will essentially run when I do my F5 debugging as a pro developer. I just have to define how I want to modify that. So I'm going to take this code here, replace it with some code that I wrote earlier. Let's try that one. So now we have all of this code inside of here, and what it's basically doing is it's parsing through that response that we got back in our web page, or from our API call, and it's basically reconfiguring it so that it is a collection of items that have properties like title, date, and speaker. So I'm going to run this here locally just to show that, as we would typically do, is actually run this and debug it and get it working and be in the right format that we expect it to be in. It'll take a few seconds in here and it will automatically go ahead and make that call. It's calling out to the same API that we had in the API management, and it's calling our get sessions object, and that's just the breakpoint so we can see that, and then we'll go through that. And you see here, our data has essentially changed shape in that we now have an object that has our H reference, our title, and our time slot and speaker. All of that makes it easy for Jamie and his team to consume, so I can go ahead and pass it back to you, Jamie, and give it a try on your app.
Awesome. Thank you, Rich. That's going to make life a lot easier. So, excuse me, I'm back into Power Platform again. And what we've done is we've updated the custom connector to include that code that Rich added to the connector. And so now when I go and test my get sessions operation, now I can see a different data structure. In my items list, now an item consists of a session that has the href, that link that we had before, but now it also has specific attributes for title, time slot, speaker. That's going to make life a lot easier. If I go back to my application and I created a separate screen to use with the new version of our connector, I still have the same, I get my items for my gallery, my items property is still set to, now I'm using the new version of our connector, but I'm still calling the get sessions action. But now when I go to look at the data structure for my sessions, now I have attributes hanging right off of the record that give me direct access to title, speaker, time slot, all of that good stuff is here that we need. So now it's a lot easier for me to build my applications. Now this is something I can work with, right? So why is this important? The ability to take existing data sources, existing services in the organization, and have our pro developers utilize their skills in conjunction with our subject matter experts building low-code applications. We start to bring all of that together to create solutions faster. The other thing that we're able to do here is say, well, you know, we already have APIs, but I can't just go change those data structures because other services will break in the organization. So we can add some code to the custom connector. Going forward, you're going to have capabilities in Power Apps when you're creating a Canvas app to work directly with JSON structures. You'll be able to take a JSON string that comes back from an action call and convert that directly to a table. That capability, it's available to you now in Power Apps, but you're turning it on as an experimental feature. So it's something that you can play around with. I don't recommend, please don't put it into a production application, but it is something you can start to play with and see how JSON capabilities are being added to PowerFX. So taking those services, those APIs, a service like Azure Managed API, for example, and we wrapper that with Azure AD because we have an app registration configured for that. Now, we start thinking about resources like that in our organization, and we start thinking about the way that we can provide access and permissions to end users and groups of end users within the organization. And that's when we can start thinking about some of the capabilities around entitlements. So to talk a little bit more about entitlements, we're going to hand over to our friend Al Erdley over across the pond in London.
Thank you both. Great session. Great to see how those Fusion teams are enabling that data to actually be visible to everybody, and then to be able to, as you say, secure it using permissions in Azure AD. So when we come to think about permissions in Azure AD and what we actually need to do, we're thinking about. Sorry, was there somebody saying something there? No. So what we need to think about is, once we've got all of that content available, those apps available, how do we actually share them? So how do we actually make sure that the right people have access to them? So really where we're looking here is, if we're changing jobs, so if we're starting at a new company, if we're starting a role, changing a role, or leaving a company, what permissions do we have? We know that we do all of these things, and we know that as each of us move through different roles, we get allocated permissions. Do we keep those permissions, or are they changed every time we change our role? And it's really important because I think we've probably all been there where we go into a new organization or a new role and somebody says, okay, yeah, just give the new guy the same permissions as we've given Jane over in the corner because she's doing the same job. Now, Jane may already have gone through several different roles in the organization and have accrued multiple permissions which maybe aren't relevant for the role that she's actually in. So when we look at these, we need to know what permissions we have. What apps does somebody need access to? What data do they need access to? What content do they need access to? And therefore, what permissions do they need? The question always comes up, who knows what permissions you need to do a role? And it's inevitable that somebody's just going to say, well, it's easier just to replicate somebody else's permissions. But that's not always the right thing to do. It's not a safe way to do it because we don't always need permissions permanently. We often need permissions for a period of time. I start to work on a project for a particular client. I need access to that content. And then I complete that project. Do I still need access to it? Is that location going to be used for additional client projects that maybe I shouldn't have access to? So we need to think about permissions in terms of who needs them, who approves them, who says, yes, Al needs those permissions, and what happens when I no longer need those permissions as well. So we do have some tools to do this. So when we think about entitlements, what we're looking at here is a group of different activities that we're doing here to build these up. And I'm not going to go through all of the configuration and the setup of these. I want to just run through this quite quickly and really show you the power of this in terms of the end user. What is the end user experience? Because that's really valuable here. So one of the things that we have here is we have the concept of building a set of resources that we want to put into a catalog and say, actually, we've got a bunch of groups. So, are they groups that we're assigning, our permissions to? Are we publishing Power Apps to those groups? Are we allowing those groups access to our different SharePoint sites or different teams? We have apps in there as well. So where we're talking about using Azure AD as the gatekeeper, I'm authenticating into it, and then I'm going to actually do the authorization there and say, do you have access to an application? We can bring those apps into these as resources into these catalogs. What we then do is we say, we want to build essentially an access package. We're going to put together several of these different items and allocate permissions. So we might have one access package that is, say we're saying HR, for example, where we've got an access package for a manager who has manager permissions to SharePoint sites, owner permissions on Teams, maybe admin permissions on a couple of apps. And then we might have an HR analyst role which doesn't have the owner and the admin permissions, but has lower level permissions. So we're creating different ways that we're actually pushing these access packages out in terms of the permissions that we're allocating to them. And then we can have different approval processes for each of those as well. So we might say that one access package is accessible only to internal folks in particular groups. So HR, you might say, well, actually, we've got a group that we're going to publish it to, and everybody in that group is going to be able to basically request an access package, and then we'll have an approval process for it. Others we might be publishing externally, so we can publish these externally and have external people as part of that approval process, or we can just allocate them manually. So we've got different ways that we can manage these different packages and actually have different processes to go through and approve them. And really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to say, rather than just replicating a set of permissions that somebody else has, we're defining an access package with a set of resources in there and allocated permissions, which people can request. And then we have an audited lifecycle for them. So let's think about what this actually means in practice. So let's say we've got Zachary. Zachary is a new starter. He's just joined the HR department. It's his first day, and he's basically got basic access to things that he needs. And one of the places that he can go is a place where he can request permissions. Once he goes there, he's been told that he needs to go to My Access and ask for Tranter HR as the access package. So that's what he's going to do. And then we've got Sharon, who's Zachary's manager, and she knows what access package he needs in his role. So she's the one who's told him, Tranter HR, that's what you need to do your role. Now, she is his manager, and for this approval process, we're using Line Manager as the first step of approval here. And we could have multiple steps, but in this scenario, we're just going to use the single step here. So as Zachary, he goes in, so he fires up Office, and he might need to ask how he gets to My Access. It's not commonly known. So he goes up to View Accounts, and he goes in, and he can see that drop down at the top, My Account. So he pulls that down, and he chooses My Access. Once he goes there, he has an array of access packages which have basically been published to him. So depending on the roles, the groups that he's in, these have been published to him. He has permissions to request any of those. Now, he's been told that he needs to ask for Tranter HR. So that's about halfway down there. And so he's going to click on that request. And when he does that, he gets some questions that he needs to answer. So one of the benefits of this process is because we have an audited life cycle around this approval process, we can ask custom questions, which may help whoever's approving it to actually answer the question of, should this person be given access to this particular access package? So we have short questions, long questions, options. And so when we go for it, we fill that information in. We can request it for a specific period if we need it, just for a week, and we can force mandatory questions as well. So what's the business justification? So we click on the request access button at the bottom there, and we get a little toast that pops up to say, yes, this is being processed. So we know that that request has been successful. It's been sent off. And so Sharon is going to now receive an email. So she receives a notification to say approve or deny the request for Zach. So he's gone through, it says, who he is, his organization, because remember, this could be an external organization that he's requesting from, and what he's requested access to. It's also got the justification there, the start date, the end date. So it's got some information there. And then there's this approve or deny request. So it's very easy for Sharon to be notified that there is a request. When she clicks on that link, it takes her straight into that approval. So notice that we're in that My Access area as an approver this time. And we can see that that request was made. We can see that actually there's a due date. So we give it a period of time for Sharon to actually make that request. If she doesn't respond, then we can decide what we want to do, whether we want to escalate to somebody else or whether we want to just cancel that request. So we have options in the process around how we manage it if somebody's not available to approve or deny it. And when we look at that request, we can see some of the information over there. We've got request details. So when we do that, we can see, again, all the details. We can see the answers to those custom questions down there at the bottom as well. And when we go back, we might want to see the package details. So maybe we just want to remind ourselves, what are we actually giving people access to here? So we can see that there are groups and teams, some SharePoint sites. If there are applications in there as well, then we would see those as well, and we would see the role that's being assigned. So we can see what we're granting access to. And we can also see the approval history. So if there are previous steps that have taken place, previous approval steps, we would see those in here as well. So we can provide a reason. I hired him, and we can click on approve. So when we click on approve, again, we get a toast that says, actually, that's been processed. Now, if I come back as Zachary, I come back and I look in here and I'm looking at all of the request history here. So I can see at the top there, Tranter HR. So the status is delivered. So that means that it's actually being allocated to me. So I've got all of the access that I actually need for this particular access package. So that delivered is really important. You can see that we've also got removed there. So if something is removed, that means that basically it's got to the end of its life cycle. And when we get a review at the end, we can say, what do we want to do? Do we want to do, an access review to maintain access to that package? And an access review would basically be something that we're saying, maybe every 3 months, we want to prompt somebody, usually the line manager to start with, to say, does Zachary still need access to this content, or has he moved on? Is he no longer in this role? So we can look at how we actually do those continuous access reviews to make sure that we're proactively asking the question of, should we remove access or not? And when we get to the point where we're saying, actually, it's been removed, we can actually go in and re-request it if we need to. Now, some of the things that also happen here are, if I've got one package that's granted to me, that might actually prevent me accessing something else. So there is the concept of the separation of duties here to say, I've got Tranter HR, maybe I'm not allowed to have the finance package. So I can't actually have both of those at once, because that would be maybe a conflict of interest. So it's very important for us to track what access packages people are using and be able to actually manage, where there may be those conflicts of interest as well. So if I go in and I view this, again, I can see the history. So I can see, the details of the request, and I can see the process that it's gone through in terms of it was pending approval, and then it was approved by Sharon, it was delivered, and now I've got action sent. So I can see all of that information there. So I can see the process. So that does mean that if it is still in progress, I can see where it's at. I can see, do I need to chase somebody? Do I need to just follow up maybe with my line manager and just highlight that maybe somebody still needs to respond to a request because they haven't responded yet? So I can see all of the information that I need to actually help me as an employee stay on top of, the packages that I should have. So the key concepts here that we've just shown you very quickly as the end user experience are, as an admin, I would create a catalog. I would create those access packages that are part of that catalog, and I can delegate that out as well. As an IT admin, I could delegate that out to business users who know what they need to actually allocate to people, to their employees. So whether that's apps, whether that's Teams, whether that's SharePoint sites, all of those can be managed within a single access package and a single request process. As a user, I can browse all of the access packages that have been published to me. So remember, I can publish a bunch of HR access packages, but I might publish them only to the HR department. So I don't have to publish them to the whole organization, and I can publish them externally as well. That My Access page is available externally. So if you've got contractors coming in or partners who come in and work on projects for you, you can actually manage their permissions to internal content in the same way. And then we've got the approval process. So The approval process can have multiple steps. I showed you one step with a line manager, which is the default that we would usually use. If it were an external person, it would usually go to somebody in their organization as a first step of approval. You know, I'm the manager of the team in a partner who are working for your organization. I would be the first person who would actually approve, yes, they're working on this team. They should be having access to the content. And then once that's approved, the user gets access. They see all of those teams pop up. They have access to the applications. And then we can do those access reviews, those periodic reviews, where we can choose to actually proactively ask the question, does this person still need permissions? And this is all really geared around making sure that we are managing that allocation of permissions, but we are by default doing access reviews, which if nobody responds, we can actually set them up so that they actually revoke permissions. So by default, we are taking permissions away unless somebody renews the confirmation that actually those permissions are still needed. So before I go to questions, very quickly, there is another session later on delivered by some fellow MTC architects, Todd and Michael, which will go into a bit more around how you can actually do the automation of provisioning as well. So well worth checking out. That's what, about 5 hours away? Maybe 4 hours away? Can't see the time at the moment. So are there any questions?
Yes, there are. Shall I read those out to you, Al?
Would you? Yes, that would be fantastic.
So
Thanks,
the
Ali.
first question is from Daniel. Can we provision a number of access packages? Azure AD groups, so file shares, Azure AD, SharePoint Azure AD groups, Power App sharing user access AAD groups in a DevOps pipeline?
There are APIs that you can use to access this. Providing them as part of a DevOps pipeline, I've not tried that before. Potentially, but you would have to investigate that to see whether those APIs could be built to use the pipelines. It would probably also depend. I think there were a few terms in there in terms of file shares and things to make sure that you're using Azure AD as an application to be able to manage those permissions. So there might be some constraints there. But it's certainly worth looking at to make sure that you confirm what you can and can't do.
Thank you very much. Hopefully that answers your question. Mark is asking, granting permissions with these access package catalogs sounds to me a little bit like RBAC, but instead of roles-based, it's functionality-based access control with optional time frame. Do I understand this as correct?
That is correct. It is functional. So it's really looking at, and it's looking at saying, you know, I need access to these teams. So for example, I joined the MTC. There's a bunch of teams that I need access to do with our worldwide community. How do I grant access to people who are a member of the MTC organization? Well, I use an access package to say these 5 teams, these 4 SharePoint sites, these applications, this is what a member of the MTC, the Microsoft Technology Center, would need. So it's really looking at how you look at them from a functional perspective and say, how can I bunch those together and give those to one person through an access package with an approval process in place as well. So it's not quite like PIM in terms of privileged identity, which is just in time for a period of time. This is more role-based. Based on my role, what do I need access to?
Thank you very much. Another question for you. Can we use on-prem Azure AD groups? Can we use on-prem AD groups in these access packages, assuming they are synced to Azure AD?
Yes. So it's if they're in Azure AD, then yes.
I thought so. Next one is, can you restrict these access packages to only apply to certain AD groups, as a person has to be a member of a department AD group before they could be applied at all?
Yes. So the concept of publishing an access package out means that you can say, if you've got an AD group, an OU that says HR, you can publish to that group, and then only the members of that group can request the access packages. So it means that, you know, HR would see the access packages related to them, finance would see the packages related to them. If you were geographically diverse, you could say, actually, you know, UK sees only access packages related to the UK, whereas the US sees packages related to them. So it's a key concept that you are publishing them to certain groups of people who can then request them.
Fantastic. There's a couple more questions in the chat, but I think we should probably just answer them offline, because I'm aware that James and Rich haven't had a chance to answer a couple of their questions that was in the chat.
Excellent.
That's
Okay.
okay, Ali. If you guys want to keep going, we were able to answer through the chat.
Okay. Sure. Okay, then. So the next one is, can access packages control access to OneDrive folders as well?
No, it's only Microsoft 365 groups and SharePoint sites, not to OneDrive.
And Teams as well, right?
Teams are built on the Microsoft 365 groups.
Yeah. If the access package has a number of days set for expiration and an external user's access expires before they request an extension, can the external user re-request access to the access package?
Yes, they can. So it's by default, the process is that if the response isn't responded to in a timely manner, then you can set it so that it will revoke access. That doesn't, you're not preventing people from re-requesting access.
Fantastic. I think that was pretty much it.
Okay, and I'll drop a link into that session later on about securing Teams, which will be a follow-up for this, and we'll cover some of the similar subjects.
Excellent. There also, if you're interested in the more topics around Fusion Teams and merging professional development skills along with low-code development, there was a session yesterday by one of our colleagues, Brendan Colburn. I'll put a link in the chat for it, but it was around creating custom user interface controls using what we call our Power Apps control framework. So again, a capability around using custom code to create additional services and accesses for your low-code developers to build out their applications. Thank you, everyone, for joining the session today. Al, Ali, thank you very much. It's great to work with you guys. Good to see you again. And I think that'll wrap us up for the day.
Fantastic. Thank you both. And thank you all for the questions and the interest in the session.